I kind of wish we had just banned it in America, to be very honest with you.
Wow.
Let's just move on.
Fuck TikTok. Let's ban Twitter. Elon Musk's social media network X has been officially banned in Brazil. After feuding with the Brazilian government for months, refusing to suspend a small handful of far-right accounts or hire a local lawyer, which is required by law in Brazil, the country's Supreme Court voted unanimously to ban the app nationwide. Today, we're going to discuss stan culture, the impact of Brazil on the internet as we know it, and the effects of suddenly losing tens of millions of voices online. To do that, I've brought in one of my favorite internet culture reporters and former resident of Brazil, Ryan Broderick. He writes a must-read newsletter about the internet called Garbage Day. Ryan, welcome to Power User.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to break down exactly what is going on between Elon and Brazil. Tell me a little bit about what happened and when this feud between Elon and the Brazilian government began.
Well, it's been going for a while. They have been forcibly enacting across multiple platforms since their insurrection last year. They had their version of January 6th in their capital city of Brasilia. And unlike the US, their federal Supreme Court has been very strict with particularly foreign social media platforms, threatening to fine them hundreds of thousands of dollars a day for misinformation. They were very strict with YouTube. The current conflict between Musk and the federal Supreme Court in Brazil is based around the removal of, we've since discovered, 7 accounts that Musk did not want to suspend. And so over the weekend, the federal Supreme Court in Brazil was like, that's enough. We're going to block it. And they had initially imposed a fine for any Brazilian using a VPN to access the site, but that has since kind of been knocked back a bit. So as of recording this right now, Brazilians are still not allowed on X.
Brazil is obviously a significant portion of Twitter's user base. I think it was estimated around 40 million people now don't have access to Twitter or X. How big of a loss is this for Elon?
It's big. I've seen the 40 million figure as well. Most times I've ever looked into this, I've seen Brazil at like the 3rd biggest country represented on the site. So it's a massive amount of users that are now no longer able to access it. And Brazil was also a long-term holdout on X after it became X. There really was not anywhere else that Brazilians who were on Twitter were interested in going to. So up until now, they really sort of fought the transition, and now they've been forced off.
How do Brazilian Twitter users differ from, other users around the world?
I mean, the short answer is they don't, but they use it a lot and they're extremely engaged.
Well, that's a difference.
Yeah, but it's not like, say, Japan, where they're using it in a completely different way that would like be totally out of place in the US, or even like the UK, who they use it totally differently. Brazilians are pretty much doing the same things we're doing on it. They're like fighting with politicians. They're updating each other on their favorite, pop culture events, and they're sharing a lot of fan fiction and fan art. Like, they're doing all the same things we are, but because they have just a sort of different level of importance on internet culture in Brazilian society and Brazilian pop culture, it feels very different. It feels almost like the way Twitter did in America in 2013, but that just never ended.
Oh, the glory days.
Yeah. Like, imagine Miley Cyrus twerking on the VMAs, but it has been that way every day for almost 20 years.
Amazing. Speaking of Miley Cyrus, I think Brazilian Twitter has always played a really significant role in pop culture and music. You had Brazilian Twitter playing a really key role in, I think, the launch of Lady Gaga's career. Obviously, BTS standum is strong. Elon Musk's ban of X in the country was called 9/11 for Stan accounts. People were comparing it to the burning of the Library of Alexandria. Can you talk a little bit about the Brazilian Stan culture universe and what role X plays in that?
Yeah, so I've definitely like asked Brazilians and Brazilian bloggers I know and Brazilian internet culture experts like why they are so into stan culture. And like the best explanation I've ever heard is that Brazil is it's sort of like a hegemonic island in South America. It's like the only country in South America that speaks Portuguese, so it has its very distinct culture. It is extremely curious about sort of global pop culture at large, but they have their own way of sort of talking about it and socializing about it. And it's also a place where pop artists never go.
Yeah.
So like the first big meme that sort of, came out of Brazil and crossed the ocean was "come to Brazil." And the bottom of every reply on Twitter at the time, you'd see "come to Brazil." And that is like a very real thing. Like, artists don't go to Brazil. It's hard. It's tricky to go there. So it has sort of created, I think, this very intense digital reflection of that. So, your favorite artist might not show up, but you're going to spend all day long, fighting with other people who don't like them or talking to them in their mentions or whatever it is.
I was talking to a bunch of people in LA that work in sort of the entertainment world and the music world about how they thought of this. And I mean, they were definitely like worried about its impact on their artists and kind of trying to assess, how much of their different artist fandoms were Brazilian if this was going to affect, for instance, like merch sales or, like the sort of the unpaid promotional work that a lot of these users do for American pop music artists and actors and things like that.
I wish those people would go to Brazil. I wish they weren't using Brazilians as unpaid promotional tools for them. But yes, I think you are going to see a serious drop in, how the internet looks and feels, especially on X.
Yeah. Another thing that somebody noted on Twitter is that a lot of these accounts are sort of unofficial, unpaid pop culture archivists. They're keeping track of celebrities' public appearances, photos, updates, and things like that. If that goes away tomorrow, what effect do you think that will have on sort of like the way that we archive and catalog pop culture?
I think, if you are using X for that sort of thing, you're going to notice it. That said, this is not the first time like this sort of thing has happened to Brazilian internet users. I mentioned this in a piece I wrote this week about this on my newsletter Garbage Day, but Brazil for a while was like one of only 2 countries that were still using the Google social network Orkut. And it was like so popular that pretty much almost every Brazilian at the time had an account on there.
Explain what Orkut is to people that have never used it.
I mean, the easiest way to explain it was like it was Google's kind of like half-baked MySpace competitor, but it had this ability to organize by communities or groups, which like even at the time, Facebook in the early mid-2000s didn't have that capability. And so like Brazilians were just using this like for years and years and years and years. And then they all sort of started moving over to Twitter and they found each other very quickly. And I've already seen that effect this week where like, at least in my own experience, like every Brazilian I know is already moved over to BlueSky or they're making accounts on Threads that they're not using. So it is happening. And I do think a lot of the things that we liked about Brazilian Twitter were not super specific to what Twitter is and does. So you'll see this effect. I mean, I'm a Tumblr user still in the year 2024, and they're all over there too now.
You use this word in your piece called Zuera. I might be pronouncing it wrong. Can you explain what that means and kind of how it relates to the way that Brazilians use the internet?
Sure. It comes from the Portuguese word zoar, which means to joke or fool around or mess around. And Zuera is, I mean, the easiest way to describe it is like if you've ever made a typo in a group chat and then all your friends repeat the typo over and over again and start putting it into memes and just like making fun of you nonstop, that's Zuera. And so it is this thing that like Brazilians, I mean, it's kind of like a millennial term. I don't really think Gen Z is using it that much, but it was this sort of way of describing the feeling of being on Brazilian internet. And some of the feedback I've gotten from Brazilian readers actually this week was that one of the reasons Threads isn't good for that sort of experience is not only just the algorithm breaks the entire flow of conversation, but also it's tied to your Instagram. And in Brazil, Instagram is now sort of the de facto replacement for Facebook, which means your friends and family will see you being a complete psycho on the internet, and they don't want that.
Yeah, let's talk about the different like competitors and where people are going. Because as you mentioned, I think a lot of people on Threads seem very upset that Brazil is not embracing Threads.
Good. People on Threads who like Threads should be upset forever. They are the lamest people on earth. It's sub-LinkedIn to me. Okay, so BlueSky is the winner in terms of just like sheer amount of users moving over there. Threads is now in second based on sort of some reports I've seen this week. But the Brazilians, once again, this is totally anecdotal, but the Brazilians that I know, the bloggers, the influencers that I've followed forever on Twitter, they're going over to Threads. They're setting up an account. There's like no profile picture. They're not doing anything with it. They're complaining about it. I've seen a lot of angry Portuguese Threads posts about how it sucks. Meanwhile, on BlueSky, they have just sort of slid right back into whatever they were doing on Twitter, on X. So, and then I've seen some users on Tumblr reactivating or sort of moving some of their stuff over to Tumblr, but that's always going to be very small. And that's pretty much just for like the super duper niche fandoms, probably.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, Blue Sky, I think, got reportedly over 1 million new users in the first 72 hours or something after this switch happened. Why is Blue Sky such a winner? I mean, Blue Sky, they still don't even have video capabilities on there.
So Blue Sky was already pretty popular with Brazilians when the first Twitter exodus was starting and people were moving over to Blue Sky when it opened up for the public. There was already a massive amount of Brazilians and also Japanese users and sort of the other sort of cultural power user groups were already over there. So that definitely helps. The other thing is that it doesn't tie to your Instagram. So, your family isn't going to see you posting nonstop about Miley Cyrus or whatever.
You can post freely on there.
Yes. And there's no algorithm. In fact, it's the only thing left that has that as the default. Everything else sort of tries to obscure it with a For You page knockoff. So the kind of classic Brazilian internet culture of, organic conversation spreading out into different sort of subcultures and groups and communities that used to happen on Twitter can happen very naturally on Blue Sky.
How much of Blue Sky is really going to replace Twitter? Like, will these Stan accounts move over to Blue Sky? Will people turn to it the same way? Like Blue Sky, the fact that it's chronological and it's a little bit more complicated, and the fact again that they don't have video, it doesn't really have much multimedia in there. It seems like that's the way that social media platforms have really gone in the past few years. I mean, do you think this is something that is going to be a long-term plan, or do you think it might just end up where a lot of fewer people use it for the first couple months and then fade off?
Well, I think the uncomfortable thing is that the desire to use a website like Twitter is inherently something that people under like 33 don't care about.
Don't tell me that, Ryan.
Like that's just not real. It's not coming back. So what we're talking about is like, where are we housing like millennials for the next couple of years until like they give up?
Until we go off into our irrelevance.
Yeah. That said, like TikTok is not at the same level of cultural importance in Brazil. It is popular, but it has a competitor there called Quai. And the difference between TikTok users and Quai users is very class-based. So typically like the upper middle class, you're going to see them on TikTok, and, working class, lower income users, they're on Quai. Even still, though, it's not like a situation that we have in America where TikTok is leading the discourse of the country all the time. That was still very much X. So what will be the deciding factor is where the upper crust of Brazil lands. Like, where will the politicians go? Where will the editors? Where will the celebrities? And then everything else will kind of fall downstream from there.
And
we
where
don't
do you
know
see
yet.
that happening? Like
I don't see it happening on Blue Sky. That's for goddamn sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see it. Look, if you make over $500,000 a year, like you should not be on Blue Sky. Like that is not a place for people
Yes.
who have like disposable income. That is a place for like everyone else. No, I assume it will be some version of what we've seen here in the US, which is that it'll be some people on Threads, it'll be some people on Blue Sky, some other website. It'll just sort of break up a bit. Although the question of like, how do we all come back together again, or at least create a feeling that we're all back together again on the internet, that might be solved in Brazil faster than in the US, just because their society is different and their sort of like desire to like communicate with each other as a culture, as a country online is a lot stronger, I think, than, what you would see in Europe or even the United States.
So speaking of Threads, Instagram and Meta have politicians that have Instagram accounts. They've set up Threads accounts. They have the celebrities on Instagram. Like, you would think that Threads would be this natural, I guess, successor to Twitter. And yet, as you mentioned, people are so hostile to it. Why is Threads such a bad place? And why aren't people adopting it more, Brazilian or otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely like global level issues with Threads, and then there's some specific Brazilian quirks. To start with the Brazilian ones, Instagram in Brazil sort of has a different role in society and culture than it does like maybe in the US, where Instagram, for instance, is like the first place you go to check if like a restaurant looks good. Instagram feels much more like a directory, kind of almost closer to like a Google Maps replacement. It's where you're seeing what your friends are doing, but it's also where you're seeing what's going on. It feels a little more active, less sloppy, as in full of slop, than it does like when I'm in the US and I turn it on.
But that makes me think that it would be a good Twitter replacement then.
So the problem is It's also where your friends and your family are, and most Brazilians do not want, let's say, their grandmother to see what they're posting about Timothy Chalamet.
So you think it's just that? Like, I mean, can't you set up a burner account? Speaking of the Timothy Chalamet, right? Like,
Yeah.
whatever that Timothy Chalamet account that, said goodbye last week, couldn't they just set up a burner Threads account and start posting their Timothy Chalamet updates on Threads? I mean, there's tons of Stan accounts on Instagram too, right?
There are some, yeah. If they did, and they could, it's a little complicated, but you can. I have two Instagram accounts. It's
have
kind of annoying,
dozens,
but it
Ryan.
works. They don't sync super well with Threads, but you can. Once you do that, though, then you get into the global problems with Threads. So first, you have the fact that the initial users in almost every country I've seen were all kind of either media people or academics, which are even worse. And so the initial users are pretty boring. It also doesn't have a good discovery. Like, still, the search is kind of broken. The hashtags don't really work. I don't even know if they are hashtags. I don't know what they're like. Those little like autofill category things that are kind of
Things just turn
miserable.
blue sometimes, and you're like, I
Yeah,
guess this
it's
is
super.
searchable.
Yeah, it's super dorky and weird. And then it defaults to the For You tab, which is still not very good, even though there is a following tab. And it also is the fact that, to bring it back to Brazil, the Brazilian media culture sort of being online and being, and the transformation that we went through in the 2010s, where like the media became kind of part of pop culture in this arguably problematic way, happened less in Brazil. There is still very much like the old newspaper guard. There is still very much like the major news channels, and they aren't really having a good time online. They might get in fights with each other, but like I said, it still feels a bit like 2012. So if you gave, let's say, young Brazilian users the option of BlueSky or Threads, I think they're probably going to go towards BlueSky just because it seems a little less old and a little less fuddy-duddy.
What about YouTube? I mean, they have like status updates on YouTube channels. Like, I don't know, is Google playing a role there at all?
So the big problem with video streaming in Latin America and South America is that the ad rates are horrible. That's why the largest Spanish speaking like Twitch streamers, for instance, are all based in Spain, because they're getting European ad rates. So, I know YouTubers in South America who are like very popular, even by US standards, and they're making a fraction. Even in their currency, they're making a fraction of what you would make in the US or Europe. So I think that's always going to be a hurdle for video creation in South America, is that the advertisers are just like not interested in South Americans seeing their
Yeah,
content.
they can't get the pop stars, they can't get the advertisers. They're getting the short end of the stick.
It's tough. Look, man, it's tough. The internet is like a capitalistic nightmare, and it is screwing over the internet's favorite people, which are Brazilian Stan accounts. Like, they just need some support, and they've been once again screwed over by a bunch of rich people fighting over stuff that does not matter.
How long lasting is this? I mean, it seems to me this is totally untenable. Like, I cannot understand why Elon will just ban these 7 accounts. He's caved for, requests from every other authoritarian regime, whether it's Turkey or India, etc. Like, do you see this lasting, or do you think Brazil will cave?
I mean, Brazil started with the VPN ban, realized that was completely impossible to enforce, and has walked that one back in the last couple days. One of the accounts, one of the 7 that was like included in the court order, doesn't even exist anymore. Like, they deleted it themselves or whatever. So there is a good chance that it just solves itself. That said, I never see a situation happening where Elon Musk plays ball, because you mentioned India, you mentioned Turkey. Those are right wing, those are authoritarian governments. He loves those. Mm-hmm. He does not like the new president of Brazil, Lula, who is the old president of Brazil, who is an unabashed leftist. So that is the political core of the disagreement there. Now, all of that said, I still don't think this is permanent. I just don't. It's too silly. It's possible, but I think Twitter needs the Brazilian users more than Brazil needs Twitter. And I think there's a chance that Elon Musk just has this big temper tantrum. It lasts a month, and then quietly plays ball, and then all the Brazilians get to come back.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of politics, Stan accounts have traditionally been so active in political movements. I know you had Brazilian Stan accounts playing major roles in sort of pushing LGBTQ rights, environmental activism, etc. How do you think that the removal of Brazil will impact the broader sort of political discourse?
It will definitely turn down the volume a bit. It will probably make X feel closer to like its actual social impact. Like, like we're sort of seeing the whittling down of like what has probably always been true about Twitter, which is that it's this loud screaming thing that isn't quite big. I kind of wish we had just banned it in America, to be very honest with you.
Wow.
Let's just move on. Let's just move on. Because
Fuck
it is sort of,
Let's ban Twitter. I'm on board with that.
I'm curious as well how it will feel. I think the overwhelming thing though is it's just going to be quieter and a little more boring.
All right, Ryan. Well, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, that's the show. You can watch full episodes of Power User on my YouTube channel at Taylor Lorenz. Power User is produced by Travis Larchik and Jelani Carter. Our video producer is Brandon Kiefer. Our executive producer is Zach Mack. Power User is part of the Vox Media Podcast Network. If you like the show, give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. We'll be back next week. See you then.